I would like to ask you about the first publication you mentioned, so the one which was the reply to Solow's paper.
Yes.
So I have the feeling that among the 4 publications you were mentioning, that one is the one which is more connected probably to the issue of structural economic dynamics. And I think it would be interesting to know exactly which was the point of your criticism to Solow's approach and the difference between Solow's approach and your own approach that then you developed into your way of looking at technical progress. So can you just...
The connection is that coming from Cambridge, England, at that time, and having followed the discussions in Cambridge, England, of on the one side, Sraffer's interpretation, in a sense, of classical economic theory in the way in which has emerged in Ricardo, and at the same time the expression of the problems, major problems of capitalist economy, capital accumulation, in the way in which John Robinson has absorbed and re-expressed it. It's very curious to talk of it at present, because that book of John Robinson, that was hailed at that time as a major contribution to economic theory, have been forgotten. I mean, nobody teaches or dares to teach economic theory concerned with capital accumulation on the basis of John Robinson approach. See? And yet, having carried on these discussions, or this is perhaps not the appropriate way of putting it, having carried on the various discussions that have gone on in Cambridge, because at that time, and they were very many and very, very extended, the publication of John Robinson's book on the accumulation of capital at that time was taken as a major contribution to economic theory, even if later on the book was forgotten in a sense. I remember that Dick Goodwin, and this was the result of my connection or my acquaintance and interest in what Dick Goodwin had been publishing and was lecturing about. Now, at that time, reminds me that Dick Goodwin tried very hard to mathematize, we may say, John Robinson's accumulation of capital. But he always ended up in a very unsatisfactory situation. As far as I am concerned, he advised me to read very carefully Wicksel's lectures of political economy, actually, which I did. I mean, on that year in which I was, my first year in which I was in Cambridge, I went through Wicksel's works very, 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 very carefully. And actually, I remember I presented a paper at the seminar for research students in Cambridge on the subject of so-called Wicksell effects. The Wicksell effects were terms coined by John Robinson, referring to the way in which the I don't know how to define it properly. I mean, the way in which Wicksell carried on himself his analysis of capital accumulation, theory of capital. It was mainly the theory of capital, and that is how. I mean, that is how I. That is how I came to approach Bob Solow's investigation of the United States. Now, the way in which John Robinson had put the problem of capital accumulation was that appears to me very, very clearly, was very strikingly in opposition to the reliance on the production function, which is an analytical subject, an analytical construction that came out from neoclassical economics, and I tried to see whether the analysis of the problems of measuring changes in productivities were looked at within a Wickelsian, we might say, framework, reinterpreted though on the line of classical economics, mainly Ricardian economics, the way in which Ricardo came out in Schaffer's interpretation, and comparing it with the neoclassical framework which had been adopted by Solow, appeared to me to give rise to different evaluations, and actually this was my own conclusion.
Yeah.
My conclusion was very strongly opposed to Bob Solow's evaluation in such a way that by doing some evaluation, computation of the changes in productivity in the United States economy, I came to conclusions which were opposed to those of Solow. I must say that in the literature that followed, it was Bob Solow's analysis which was developed and was accepted as the one that was more friendly in a sense to traditional economics. It is in Bob Solow's steps that the following analysis of evaluation of changes in productivities were continued. But it seems to me paradoxical because his own approach was so devoid, it seemed to me, of strong economic concerns. Now, it looks very, very strange to me that it was in fact from that article which I criticized that the result came out that most of the productivity increases were not due to a movement along the production function, but to changes in the residual. Most of the changes in productivities were due to the residual with respect to the neoclassical framework, and yet
this did not rise some question about is the framework correct to analyze this problem.
I mean, it seemed to me that the most logical conclusion from Solow's analysis would have been to go and try to explain the residual, which was the major factor of the changes that take place, not the movements along the production functions, but in the whole analysis, the opposite approach was accepted, mainly to go on looking at the changes in productivity in terms of production functions, which seemed to me the wrong way to pursue. And later on, this was also confirmed by the blow up of the discussion on the capital theory, when it turned out in the end that there was no logical framework that could sustain the neoclassical claim that the production should be looked at in terms of production functions, especially, and not only in macroeconomic terms, actually in any term that could be proposed.
And something more about that reply to Solow. I think that there is really something which then, there was already an implicit acquaintance with the issue of structural economic dynamics in the way you developed afterwards in two ways. First, in that paper, you start talking about the issue that consumption goods are produced by means of capital goods, which are in turn produced. So you started developing the idea that productivity in the production of consumption goods should also take into account the fact that productivity changes in the production of capital goods. So I saw there some kind of preliminary idea concerning subsystems and vertically integrated sectors. So the idea that there is a production chain which is connected and productivity is a vertically integrated concept. And the second point raised by that article, which I find very interesting, especially in connection to your further developments, is the fact that you tried to analyze the direction of technical progress in terms of Harrodian neutrality. So you put forward a classification of technical progress that you will then develop in the 1981 book, which starts from Harrod perspective.
Yes.
And you sometimes mention the fact that actually many textbooks, almost all textbooks, starts talking about technical progress and theory about technical progress starting from Solow, while Harrod already developed some very important theory in that sense. So could you maybe elaborate a bit on the influence that Harrod on the one side and this this preliminary work about productivity then led you to elaborate your own approach to technical progress.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, I have always been impressed by the fact that in all textbooks that deal with macroeconomics, almost all, at least, textbooks that deal with macroeconomics, including the most recent one, normally the authors start the whole theory of economic growth from Solow's formulation, which is in terms of a production function, a macroeconomic production function. While it seems to me that the whole analysis started earlier. It started actually from Harrod's from Harrod's Keynesian hints that the whole analysis, Keynesian analysis, had to be developed for the long run, and in developing for the long run, a few very simple relations should be underlined, and they are the relations that are coming out very clearly from Harrod-Domar, what has become known as the Harrod-Domar growth model. Harrod and Domar made of the Keynesian theory to the long run passage, let's call it so, of Keynesian theory from concentration on the short run, on the crisis due to lack of effective demand that was the major point in Keynes' 1936 revolutionary work, is expressed in very simple terms. This was done independently by Harrod and Domar, but their two contributions were always put together ever since. And they are a very simple presentation of how the economy can be considered as soon as one looks at the economic system with the passage of time, when two major elements have to be added to Keynesian theory. On one side, population growth, and therefore the growth of the labor force, and on the other side, technical progress, the growth of productivity through time. Now, these two elements were introduced with a great sense of achievement by Harrod. He was saying, here we have discovered the way in which to analyze and present the movement of the economic system in time. And the only very simple analytical element that he pointed out was the rate of change. You see, we never have put, he was saying, stress on the rate of change, but the very moment we look at the passage of time, what we should refer to is the rate of change of each particular magnitude. So that the two rates of change which here are relevant is the rate of growth of population and the rate of growth of technical change, the rate of growth of productivity. By relating these very simple analytical concept to the rate of saving and to two ratios, the rate of saving of the economic system as a whole and the capital output ratio, which is supposed to be by simplicity constant through time, and in fact the major data we have we can see in the development of our system confirm this. The ratio of capital to output in the long run roughly remains stable, and we may actually insert into our model, besides the rate of growth of productivity and the rate of growth of population, these two other ratios, which we will suppose they remain constant through time. By putting together these four magnitudes, one obtains what has become known as the Harrod-Domar model of economic growth. Of course, there is an assumption, namely the capital output ratio remains roughly stable through time, an assumption which is supported by observation on long-run development in the modern system, but to make it logically consistent, we'll suppose that it will remain, the capital output ratio will remain constant. We'll call this neutral technical progress. Of course, there might be period in which the rate of the capital output ratio may change, and if it increases, we'll say that there has been a capital using technical progress. If it decreases, we'll say that there is a capital decreasing technical progress. But on the whole, we are justified in supposing that technical progress will remain neutral, and therefore capital output ratio will remain constant through time. This independently of the rate of growth of population on one side and of the rate of growth of productivity in the other. Now the relation, the fourth magnitude is the rate of saving, the proportion of income which is saved, and here too we are quite justified in supposing that in the long run this ratio will remain constant. Now, by putting together these four magnitudes, one obtains a very simple model of growth, which is an extraordinarily powerful in giving us an idea of how an economic system develops in the long run. Curiously enough, all textbooks dealing with macroeconomics starts directly from Solow. They attribute, they give the impression to the students, at least the students get the impression that the macroeconomic growth theory started with Solow's neoclassical growth model, while this was preceded by the Harrod-Domar formulation, which is much simpler, and it is earlier. And it is more sound, really, while Solow's formulation is subject to all this criticism about the existence, or about the non-existence of the production function, or the neoclassical production function. The Harrod-Domar formulation is much simpler, and in fact it is carried out simply with two equations which are dealing with the capital output ratio, the rate of growth, and the saving ratio. These three ratios are set together in a very simple way, and that is the best way, it seems to me, the simplest way of looking at the process of economic growth. Piketty's recent book actually itself is not paying sufficient attention to this simpler way of putting together those three magnitudes I mentioned before, and actually the review of Piketty's book given by Solow is setting together such a long and complicated series of arguments to illustrate Piketty's claim that most of the profits, let's say, are the results of a distribution of income that goes in favor of the capitalists, that it seems extraordinary that these things should be put in such complicated way while they would appear so straight and so clearly if one use simply Harrod-Domar's model. In my own, in a book of mine, which was in English was the first to come out, Growth and
Income Distribution.
Growth and Income Distribution. Growth and Income Distribution, Essays in Economic Theory, Cambridge University Press, 1974. Now, I have presented these relations that then have been illustrated in such a complicated way with the introduction of the production function, that it is really, it's amazing to see how simpler the relations appear in these early investigation of growth and income distribution, and nevertheless how extraordinary seems to me that these relations, so simple as they are not presented in this simple way, and one has to go through very, very complicated ways of putting the problems which are since they are relying on concepts like the neoclassical production function, which are very dubiously pursuable, while the easiest and the clearest way of putting these problems is completely forgotten. What we were saying before comes out even now from the type of criticism I had made at that time, addressed to Bob Solow's formulation in analytical terms and evaluation in empirical terms. They are dubious formulation because they are not at all supported by logic in term analysis, and they are incorrect in statistical terms. They're incorrect because as the result of my criticism published in Review Economics and Statistics 1959, I was claiming that the conclusions of Solow's article, namely that there was a shift of the production function in time from the beginning of the century to the middle of the century, and at the same time moving along the production function in the sense of increasing the capital intensity of the production process. This claim, in my own formulation, appeared to be wrong, because in between the 2 points which were compared by Solow, beginning of the century and the middle of the century, his conclusion that capital intensity had increased was incorrect. Capital intensity, as expressed by the capital output ratio, in between those 2 points had decreased, not increased. And the reason why Solow claimed the opposite was simply that the concept behind his formulation were not correct. You see, there was a
it the confusion between degree of mechanization?
Between what I then called in my dissertation and then in the book of 1981, there was a confusion between the concept associated with the capital output ratio and the concept associated with capital labor ratio. The main mistake is a consequence of the type of theoretical model he was using. He was using the neoclassical conception, let's say, of the of the way in which production is taking place by introducing a production function which was a way of extending to production to the process of production, the theory which had been developed earlier with reference to demand by the consumers. I mean, all the properties which have been supposed with reference to the choice of consumers in their decision about consumption were transferred to the process of production, and in a sense the production function which relates the input of capital and labor with respect to production of the final goods were made analytically in accordance to the assumption that had been used for the utility function and the decision of consumers. Now it can be seen that the development, and I have pointed this out, the development of the theory of production as a consequence of the what was called the marginal revolution at the end of the 18th century was made simply by extending the properties and the assumption that had been used for the utility function to a production function in the field of production. The extensions were made simply by reproducing, in a sense, for the production function, the same properties that had been studied in developing a utility function. Now, when one uses this framework for production, things work properly if there is no change in the process of production. In our case, when there is constancy of technology. If technology is constant, if there is no change in the process, no technical change in the process of production, then the analogy of the theory which had been developed for utility with a theory which is being developed for production is perfect, and all the analytical construction that had been made for utility and for the behavior of consumers can be extended by analogy to the process of production. So basically this was the way in which the neoclassical theory of production was developed. You see, if in a world in which there is no technical change, in which technology is given, one may go on and add some assumption about the form, the shape of the production function. It must be convex and smooth in a sense, and one can apply to production all the theorems which have been worked out for utility. Now, the development of a theory of this type, I think, has been the major obstacle to face on the side of production, the process of growth. I mean,
so you're basically saying that neoclassical economics tried to deal with the issue of technical progress by using a tool which is somehow meaningful only when technical progress does not exist. So they're trying to study a phenomenon with a tool which is valid only when that phenomenon does not take place.
Basically, that was the effect of extending to production all the theorems which have been developed for consumption. The great change which was supposed to take place at the end of the 19th century in economics started from utility. From the theory of utility and from the theory of consumption. It's enough to look at the preface that Gibbons really put to his major book on the theory of political economy to realize this. The whole conviction was that the economic theory should be based on a theory of consumption and of analytical framework, an analytical framework that would reproduce for production the concept which had been developed for utility and for consumption. But when we get into a framework in which we consider development through time in production, then the problem arises of how to deal with technical change. Now, in the model of Harrod and Domar that were inserted on to the theory developed by Keynes, the assumptions were very simple. What I was mentioning before, simply the introduction of rates of change of two major inputs, technology and population, and a theory about the shape, let's say, of the production technology, which was simply represented by a constant capital output ratio. That is simplicity of their model. Now, that does not mean that the capital output ratio should not change. Now, the capital output ratio is whatever it is by what we can observe when we observe the reality, and it's reasonable to suppose to start from the simplest of all assumptions. Now, the simplest of all assumption is by, or was supposed to be, by looking at observation of long-run long-run characteristics of modern production, of industrial production, that the ratio of capital to GNP, to income, could, on the whole, remain stable through time, without putting on this assumption an absolute the absolute weight, so to speak, of keeping up the whole analysis. Technical progress might be causing an increase or a decrease of the capital output ratio. But on the long run, these increases and decreases were shown to be temporary in a sense, because the capital output ratio, although changing in some particular period, it could come back. There is no necessity to bring in an essential way assumptions about this. Not only could observation confirm this long-run stability, but the analysis of the process of production and of the relation between capital and output could be examined in such a way as to bring out what was going on behind them. Now, when one analyzes long-run movement, then one can see that the Harrod idea of neutrality of technical progress, it's quite compatible with long-run stability of this ratio, which, however, must be distinguished from the ratio between capital and labor. And labor, you see.
Which is what Solow did not do in the correct way.
And this is where, on the other hand, the framework that was brought in from neoclassical analysis, that was based on a production function which was given from outside, came to complicate the matter. Now the neoclassical framework became extremely more complicated than the very primitive, simple way in which Harrod-Domar looked at the problem of production, because it required making assumptions about both the form, the shape of the production function, and its changing through time. Now, the combination of these two changes, the shift of the production function, and the necessity of changing the techniques which are chosen on the shape of a given production function, makes the system so complicated that it's very easy to get into mistakes. Now, this was what happened, it seemed to me, in the application that Solow had made to begin with of the concept of the neoclassical model to analyze movements over a relatively non-short, no longer short period. The evaluation the estimation he carried out was with reference to the United States economy from the beginning of the century to the middle of the century, 50 years. And in the end, by using the neoclassical framework, he was coming to conclude that he had to attribute most of the changes to the shifts of the production function, which a production function in neoclassical terms would have worked out very well if there was no technical progress, there was not any change from outside. But if one began to attribute to some kind of external effect the shift of the production function, then since the whole framework is based on the production function and on moving along the production function, what turned out to be the case by using that framework of interpretation was that what he had to call the residual, which meant what the increase in productivity was caused by shifting of the production function, was much bigger than the movement along the production function. And actually, since the production function cannot be observed, you can observe only the effects of changes in production on the data you have you have under observation. The difficulty was precisely that of distinguishing between movements along the production function and shifts of the production function.
But Solow also concluded something about how capital intensity did change during the period he considered, and you ended up in saying that actually his conclusion was wrong.
You see here, here you see you have to distinguish between you see how can I
mean, the issue is that he finally computed.
You see, it's what can you call capital intensity? That is really the problem. What do you see? In a world in which there is no technical progress, the change, the capital intensity may be evaluated by looking at the ratio of capital to labor, or by observing the ratio of capital to output. Now, capital output ratio and capital labor ratio may actually be alternative way of evaluating what is generally called the capital intensity. But if there is technical progress, then these two ratios differ one from the other.
And they change in different directions. They might also change in move in different directions.
Well, it doesn't matter. They may move in the same direction or in a different direction. The problem is that they move in a different way. Now, so you have to to evaluate or to analyze what is the meaning of change in the capital output ratio and what is the meaning of changing the capital labor ratio. In the neoclassical framework, you are consistent only if these two ratios change in the same direction. Now, they may be changing in the same direction if there is no technical change. But if there is technical change, then they may change in a different way. And one has got to have a theoretical conception in which you are able to distinguish between the two. My own approach was simply that you have to see or to analyze for which problem the two ratios, capital output ratio or capital labor ratio, are relevant. Now, this is what I started from. Capital labor ratio is relevant for certain problems, for example, for employment.
So the degree of mechanization.
Employment is the capital labor ratio is the relevant magnitude to observe. But for a problem of pricing and for problems of pricing, for price formation, it's the capital output ratio that is relevant. Now, I thought that the way of dealing with this problem was to, first of all, to call differently the concept with which each of them are associated. Now, the capital labor ratio is associated with, with technology, with employment. The capital labor ratio capital output ratio, on the other hand, is associated with any problem that is dealing with pricing. I thought that most of the economic analysis associated with the variation of prices was in fact connected with what was called capital intensity of the production process, while if we were to look at the capital labor ratio, I thought we could mainly associate it with variation in the technology and in the employment of labor with machines. And I began to call the two concepts by different terms. I found it more useful to talk of capital intensity with reference to the capital output ratio. And I coined a term from the capital labor ratio, calling it degree of mechanization. Now, if we keep these two concepts distinct from one another, then we can see very well that in time, when there is technical progress, the degree of capital intensity, that is capital output ratio, may well become stable, may remain stable, which is what Harrod was calling neutral technical progress. Neutral technical progress when the capital output ratio is remaining constant, while the capital labor ratio may well go on increasing all the time, which is what mainly could be observed in the type of economy we have been living in, really. And by by making simply this distinction within a very simple growth model a la Harrod-Domar, one was able not to make confusion, first of all, not to set up complicated analytical tools which needed a lot of assumptions about the shape of the production function and about the way in which the production function, which is not observable, was shifting, while in the case of Harrod-Domar you needed simply to observe the point that refer to technology at that time, so that the whole analysis became so much simpler, and in this way one could pronounce or found out what could happen to the capital intensity of the production process and to the neutrality of technical progress.
So actually when Solow said that in the period he considered capital intensity did increase, he was actually looking at the degree of mechanization. Is it correct? Because then you concluded
no, he
that
he didn't think of mechanization.
No, but
he simply thought of a production function which is smooth, well behaved, convex, and all the rest, but it's not observable.
But in your reply to him, you said, well, capital intensity actually decreased during the period.
Now,
it is the degree of mechanization.
If we associate capital intensity with the capital output ratio and the degree of mechanization with the capital labor ratio, then you can make observation without actual observation, without making any assumption on the shape of the production function, which we don't know what it is, and nobody has ever observed, and anybody to whom you, people who are connected with actual production would say that they have never heard of or never looked at the shape of the production function, because it's simply a product of assumptions, and of assumption made in such a way as to satisfy certain outside imposed properties that are connected with your theory, not with the practice, you see. And you could actually say whether the degree of mechanization and the capital intensity has increased or decreased. Now, in the case of Solow's evaluation, you see, he came to the conclusions that in my term, the capital intensity had decreased and the capital mechanization has increased. But by not having these distinctions, he simply was compelled, in a sense, to attribute some particular changes to the shift of the whole production function and other changes to moving along the production function. But all this was really supposed concept coming from the neoclassical model he had used, and which was not observable as such. The production function is not observable. You can only see some points in the supposed production function. You see some points, and then you have to assume that behind that point there is a whole function which has properties which you have had to suppose to begin with without any observation, only in order to satisfy a series of supposition that you have taken from outside.
Would you agree with what Leontiev used to say, that the neoclassical model grew up so much, so complicated that people just forgot the assumptions from where it did start, and so these assumptions
it's a very interesting remark, I must say. You say, in fact, this remark by Leontiev points out that one must distinguish between what you can actually observe and what you assume there is behind the observation. And if there are too complicated assumptions you have to make behind the observation, then you may be very easily led to forget about the relation between the two, and to attribute to something you have simply supposed behind the data, instead of simply concentrating yourself on the actual observation. Okay. Yes, but Leontiev himself was driven into making some observation himself by following the trend of assumptions that were made when he was observing that by comparing different economic systems, he found out that the United States economy, when one was supposing that there has been a long process of substitution of capital for labor, in fact ended up by having a capital intensity which was lower than the capital intensity that could be observable in less developed countries.
We are back to the confusion between capital output and capital labor.
I gave in my book an explanation of this paradox. The paradox came from a confusion between the two concepts associated. Well, leave out the terms I used, but the two concepts associated with the capital output ratio on one side and the capital labor. Well, capital output ratio on one side and the capital output ratio on the other.
Actually, this confusion has been very spread and also very important in development theory, because also all the theory, so the so-called Leontiev paradox connected to this confusion, was an issue which was studied a lot by theorists who tried to also study the relation between center and periphery.
Yes,
so all the models development.
When there is a confusion and you want to explain observation as against a framework which is logically inconsistent, you are driven to make many other assumptions or to build up many other concepts which end up by making your framework even more complicated, which is what has happened, I think.
So it's when you try to put patches to correct a theory which does not work, more or less what happened with endogenous growth theory, I would say. Do you agree? Or?
Well, to some extent, yes. In the case of Solow, he didn't even use. You see, by using his framework, this neoclassical framework, actually he moved all the time in a framework in which capital intensity and, in my term, capital intensity and capital degree of mechanization were supposed to go in the same direction. Basically, they were going in the same direction, but internally on each, internally to each production function. You see, if you consider one production function at a time, within that production function, the two concepts were supposed to look at this, go in the same direction. But the trouble was that this production function in his framework was supposed to shift all the time. Now one did not know how it would.
Yes,
one did not know how it would shift, and the assumptions were made that we are shifting in a certain consistent way, and moreover, you could not observe how it had shifted, because everything was simply the effect of suppositions. About the shape of the production function and about the shift of the production function. This is the enormous complication that was introduced. You see, the extraordinary effect is that in the analysis, in the observations, and in the fitting this observation in the process, in the models that followed, the neoclassical model prevailed, and people forgot about the simplest approach of Harrod-Domar. Harrod-Domar in this handbook. We were looking at this handbook of economic growth, you see. The handbook, it's 2,000, almost 2,000 pages long, but the Harrod-Domar model is not mentioned at all. The whole analysis starts from Solow's neoclassical production.
By the way, everyone always mentions Solow, but nobody ever mentions the poor swan, because normally it should be the Solow swan, like the Harrod-Domar, but swan disappeared from the scene almost immediately.
It would not, that is another peculiarity. Well, in fact, Swan and also Mead use the same model, but both Mead and Swan, in terms of growth model, were forgotten, but it didn't make any difference in bringing them in.
No, yes, of
because
course.
they would have called it the Solow, Swan, Mead
It was
model.
to remark that Solow was very successful and also probably very lucky with his elaborations during the
Well, he himself says it has been very lucky. Well, that made his fame, really. That well, I mean, this happened. But the problem really is why this is a type of peculiarities in the diffusion of the association of names to theories. But the more serious one is that all alternative framework, theoretical framework, have been left aside. This is more serious, because the alternative frameworks could, at least theoretical, I mean formally, they could have given a different vision of the whole process that took place, and they were not used. I mean, that's more serious than the association of names. No, I don't know. I mean, this happened. The association of names with theories is a problem that arises now all the time, in a sense.
So and I asked you, okay, so tell me, what do you think income distribution should be?
Well,
I am cutting
what I can say is that in my own framework that refers to the natural system, there is a certain distribution which is
This is what you told us
ideal.
yesterday, but now I am asking you, what would you like income distribution to be?
Well,
I mean, what's your ideal configuration?
What I would like it to be would be as near, that should be as near as possible to what I call the natural one. But of course, that entails that the institutions we have, if they do not lead there, they should be changed.
But this is a very, I think, I agree with you, but I also think that this is a very strong statement in the sense that correct me if I'm wrong, in your natural configuration, profits only serves the aim of providing new investment.
That's right.
So there is no other possible claim for profits other than investing. So basically...
No. Well, I mean, provided that this does not mean that the activity, the human activity, you see, behind the decisions about investment, the technology should go without remuneration.
Yes, of
course. It would have to be remunerated according to all other human activities.
Exactly. So basically, there should not be so much difference between wages and profits. I mean, the uneven distribution. The distribution between wages and profits.
Everything should be wages, in a sense.
Okay. So you agree with me, this is a very strong statement.
Well, we might begin to talk about remuneration of human activities independently of the traditional definition of it as it has been given in the past. We would have to go into an attitude towards human activity which is not exactly the one that was prevailing in the past or even now. I mean, the whole problem of income, of personal income distribution begins to come in exactly here.
And what do you think about the fact that nowadays the issue of personal income distribution is very much debated, while the issue of functional income distribution is not fashionable anymore? I mean, do you think that I would personally tend to think that both are important, but also functional income distribution, I mean, wages and so let's say social classes somehow disappeared from the political, economic discussion, while probably would be good to bring this issue back to the fore.
Yes, yeah. Well, this is linked up with the type of institutions we have and with the type of institutional changes that we would need or we would envisage in the future. It's a great problem. If we accept this approach, now it brings with it an enormous amount of re-evaluation of the way in which we are remunerating the human activities, in a sense. Perhaps what we did in the past is not the ideal way of dealing with it in the future. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could. This is a big problem. It's an enormous problem. The way in which we have to look at human activity and its remuneration. It opens up very wide horizons, also because what it really puts into question is the maximization of profits or of any. Is the basic. This was being the maximization of the concept of maximizing selfishness, if you like, that in the past have prevailed, may be re-evaluated really, and all the forms of remuneration which are outside the maximization of selfishness, in a sense, would be put into discussion.